Hello everyone, this is Katie Colleen here. Welcome back Colleen Clan, or if you're new, then come join the family. Today I'll be showing you how I modified an existing pair of boots to make Auron's boots from Final Fantasy X. Let's first just take a look at the existing boots that we have to work with. So this is a pair of winter boots is how they were advertised. So they're just kind of these rubber heavy duty boots. So this is what we're going to be working with for our base shoes. So let's start with making the belts. I'm cutting out 2.5 inch wide strips of pleather. And there are quite a few different belts that I need to put on both boots. So I actually made about 3 yards of just pleather strips. And with each of those pleather strips, I am folding over the edges and then folding it in half. What this does is it hides all of our rough edges that we just cut. I'm using a straight stitch on my sewing machine and just top stitching down that edge that we folded. These belts are just created for aesthetic purposes, so I didn't have to worry too much about them being durable or being able to hold any sort of weight. And I'm gonna set that aside and work on the armor for a little bit, and then we can get into attaching these to the boots. Let's pattern out our shoe armor. So I am taking a plastic wrap and I'm wrapping it around the shoe. And then I'm taking a masking tape and I'm putting that over the plastic wrap. And I'm just patterning out that kind of bottom shoe armor piece. And I can just draw out the shape of our shoe armor and how I want it to look. And now that I have the shoe armor patterned, I can take scissors, cut off that plastic wrap, and cut the design out of the masking tape. I'm tracing that masking tape pattern onto a piece of paper, and we can use that as our pattern for the shoe armor. There is one other detail, and it's this little medallion badge thing that's on his boots. I just found something circular in my craft room that I could use to pattern out a circle, and it just happened to be that the bottom of my serger thread was about the right size for the circle. With everything patterned, now we can get into cutting out our armor in the foam. Now, this foam was a bit of an experiment. So this is the foam flooring that we got at the hardware store. They were selling it on a roll. We got about 6 feet of it for about $50, and this is the same foam we used to make the sword. So I had some of that foam left over, and I wanted to see how it held up to, kind of more detailed armor work, and it was bad. This foam just does not take well to paint, to dremeling, to priming, to heat shaping. Like, this really just is not good cosplay foam. So this was a bit of an experiment, and I do not recommend you using this foam. There's a foam I got off Amazon that I really like, so I'm going to link that in the description if you're looking for an EVA foam to use. I did want to add a little detail to this shoe armor. When I made the forearm bracer, I added a border to all of the bracer pieces, and I felt like that looked really nice. So I wanted to do the same with the shoe armor, and the border is just going to be 1/4 inch in from all the outside edges of that pattern, and I'm using a 2mm craft foam for all the details. I also put this border on the circular pieces as well, and now I can glue our borders onto the main armor pieces. Now, I'm going outside because I'm using contact cement and you don't want to use that in an enclosed space. However, it was also very windy outside this day. And you'll see that I had a little bit of trouble. My foam armor was just flying away in the wind. I'm just applying the contact cement to the back of our little 2mm details, and then I am pressing it into our foam armor. The little badge on Auron's shoe has a pretty specific detail etched into it, and I want to make that as well. So I'm just taking a pen and outlining how that detail looks. And now we can start sanding. I'm using my Dremel tool with a sanding bit on it, and I'm sanding down all of the edges. Once I have all the outside edges sanded down, I can start sanding down the little details. I'm changing from a sanding bit to a drill bit, and I'm sanding down just the inside of the 2mm foam details. Now for the main shoe armor piece, there is a seam down the center, so I'm just etching in just very lightly this center seam down the shoe armor. Now let's move on to our little shoe badge. Using the drill bit, I'm going over all those little designs that we drew in with the pen. And once all of the sanding is done, I'm taking out my heat gun, and I'm just gonna go over everything with the heat gun. This takes care of any of those kind of sanding fuzzies that are still hanging on, and The hope would be that I could also heat shape this, so that is when you use a heat gun to heat up the foam, and then the foam will retain its shape as it cools. And with this foam, no luck with the heat shaping. This foam was clearly not meant for crafting purposes. So now with all our armor pieces done, I'm going to prime them with Mod Podge. I would have liked to prime them with a Plasti Dip spray paint, however, there were still quite a bit of high winds outside, so I decided to stick with Mod Podge and use it indoors. What can I say? I was on a bit of a time crunch. Honestly, that kind of describes this whole video. It was con crunch time, guys. And now I'm using an acrylic paint to do all of the painting. I'm using kind of the same matte gold that I used for the shoulder armor details for Auron. And you'll notice that as I'm applying just these flat layers of acrylic paint that you're kind of losing a lot of the inscribed detail. Same thing with the main shoe armor. I'm just using a silver paint and it is getting harder to see that center seam that we inscribed in. So when I went through with another layer of paint, I'm just using a slightly darker shade and I'm going through all of our inscribed areas, and this really pulls out the design so that it's much easier to see and we don't lose all that hard work. Once I'm done with all the layers of paint, I'm going over with a final layer of Mod Podge to seal this all up. And now for some final details on the shoe armor. The shoe armor looks like it has quite a few rivets installed in it, so I am marking out where those rivets would be. And then I'm taking the drill bit again on my Dremel tool and I'm drilling through this foam. Once I have all these little holes drilled through, I can take some rivets and I can install this the same way that I would install rivets through fabric or leather. I'm taking out my rivet tool, so it's just this little metal piece and post, and then I can install this by setting the rivets in our little rivet tools and smashing it with a hammer. So now with our belts and all our armor finished, let's attach this to the base shoes. I'm first going to glue on all of our different belting. So with our long strips of belting, I can just measure out each piece and cut it down to size. There's one belt across the toe, another one kind of across the front of the ankle, and another one crossing the back of the heel, and then one final belt at the top of the shoe. Now I also noticed there was a rivet in the belting as well. So I need to attach that before I glue this all down. You'll notice the area where two of these belts cross, kind of right where the heel of the boot is. That is where we are going to add our rivet. So I'm just holding everything on place with an electrical tape, and then I can install our rivet in place. Now the difficult part about installing this rivet is that I needed it on the shoe to place the rivet, but I could not install the rivet while it was taped to a boot. I read up that contact cement is actually really good for rubber surfaces, and since we happen to have these rubber boots, this is perfect. I'm using contact cement, which kind of seems like overkill. Now for all my shoe modifications I make that are not on heavy-duty rubber winter boots, I use the E6000 glue, and that works really well. The only thing that made me move to contact cement for this particular project was just the surface finish on these boots takes really well to contact cement, and these belts are not going anywhere. They are cemented onto the shoe. Now the downside is mistakes made in contact cement are mistakes made for forever. So you do have to be a little bit careful, and any mistakes you make at this point, there's no going back. Now you'll notice that I left quite a bit of extra belting at the bottom of the shoe, and I can just cut off that excess and we should have a nice kind of straight cut along the bottom of the boot. The armor was also added on with just a really good amount of contact cement. I applied quite a bit of contact cement to the back of our armor pieces, and then those stuck really well to the shoes. I will say that there was some cracking in the paint finish. That could be due to just having really bad foam. This was an experiment, as I mentioned before, and I'll never use this foam again. Or it could just be that I wish I'd used a Plasti Dip primer, but again, high winds, could not do, and I was on a time crunch. So moral of the story, don't put yourself on a time crunch. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section down below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.